Why being misunderstood hurts more than being disagreed with. One thing I've been thinking about recently is why certain political and social discussions frustrate me so much. For a long time, I thought the frustration came from disagreement itself. I thought I was getting upset because people held different views than I did. But after reflecting on it more carefully, I realized that's not actually the problem. The problem isn't disagreement. The problem is feeling misunderstood. I consider myself a socially conservative atheist. That's already a strange position to occupy. Religious conservatives often think I've abandoned morality because I reject religion. Progressive atheists often think I'm backward because I hold some traditional social views. As a result, I often feel politically homeless. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about concepts like feminism, patriarchy, sexism, and misogyny. These are words that get thrown around constantly in modern discussions. Sometimes they are useful. Sometimes they describe something real. But I've noticed that they often enter the conversation before the argument itself has been understood. For example, suppose I say that I value modesty. Some people immediately hear misogyny. If I say that I think men and women are different, some people hear sexism. If I say that I appreciate certain traditional gender norms, some people hear patriarchy. Now, maybe my arguments are wrong. Maybe my conclusions don't hold up under scrutiny. I'm completely open to that possibility. But what frustrates me is when people assume they already know why I hold my views before they've actually listened to the reasoning behind them. What if my views aren't motivated by hatred? What if they aren't motivated by ignorance? What if they're motivated by a sincere attempt to understand human nature and human flourishing? I don't expect everyone to agree with my conclusions. In fact, disagreement is often valuable. Some of the biggest changes in my thinking have come from being challenged. What I want is something much simpler. I want people to understand my position before they judge it. As I thought more about this, though, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't always extending the same courtesy to people I disagreed with. When I thought about feminism, I often interpreted it through the most negative examples. I thought about the activists who seem to view men primarily through the lens of power, oppression, and conflict. I thought about the social media content that feels hostile, accusatory, and divisive. But then I had to ask myself an uncomfortable question. Am I doing the exact thing that I accuse others of doing to me? If I want my own views to be interpreted charitably, shouldn't I extend the same courtesy to feminism? Shouldn't I try to understand the strongest version of the opposing argument rather than the weakest? This is something I've tried to do with religion. When I evaluate Islam, I don't want to attack the weakest Islamic arguments. I want to understand the strongest ones. When I evaluate atheism, I don't want to attack caricatures. I want to understand the strongest case. So why should feminism be any different? That doesn't mean I suddenly agree with modern feminism. I still have concerns. I still think some people interpret too many social phenomena through the lens of patriarchy and oppression. I still think social media often rewards conflict rather than understanding. I still think traditional values can have genuine beauty and value, but I've realized that criticizing something fairly requires understanding it first. And perhaps the same is true in reverse. People who disagree with me don't have to accept my conclusions. They don't have to become socially conservative. They don't have to adopt my worldview. What I hope for is something much more modest. Understand what I'm actually saying before deciding what kind of person I am. Because I've come to realize that being misunderstood hurts more than being disagreed with. Most people can handle disagreement. What they struggle with is having their views reduced to a caricature. Maybe that's the lesson I'm taking away from all this. Not that conservatives are right. Not that feminists are wrong. But that meaningful conversation begins when we stop assuming the worst motives in people and start trying to understand why they believe what they believe. And perhaps that's the standard I need to apply not only to others, but to myself as well.